Hi, everybody. Congratulations, we did it. We are on the fifth of five Valentine's Day STEM challenges. We're doing pandemic makeovers this week. If you missed any of them earlier in the week, you can find them and find. Oh, looks like my internet just wobbled out there for a second. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. You can find any of these challenges, the pandemic makeovers with social distancing and distance learning modifications, going to be doing. This should actually say challenge 5. I forgot to correct that. So it's the end of a long week. I hope you'll forgive me. The main goal here is to have the students design a candy or a confection container. So you can take this a couple of different ways, but let me just dive right in. These would be the materials I would use on a normal year. It's not a normal year. So if you're not in class, you are not going to want to expect that your kids have access to all of these things. So let's talk about some changes that you might want to make. And I'm going to give you criteria and constraints to keep it simple, and then ways to make it more difficult. And I'll give you some extension options as well to kind of like add the rigor in whatever grade level you have. So for distance learning, if you or you're hybrid, you have kids at home, they would then just use scrap paper and cereal boxes or cardboard scraps. If they have candy, great. If they don't, they can make the candy pieces out of, junk mail or whatever. They can make models of the candies because we're talking about candy boxes, right? So if they don't have it, that's fine. Or you can have them design something maybe to keep a cupcake stable and without the frosting getting onto the box, or even just like a piece of fruit. It doesn't have to be candy and it doesn't even have to be food. They can use something else to stand in for the candy pieces, right? So most of our kids we know probably have access to junk mail and probably have access to like food packaging that isn't necessarily like a problem, right? Like even like the caps or the lids of bottles could be used in places of candies in this case. So you can have them be creative and just make whatever they want to make in terms of models. So for criteria and constraints, this is kind of like where I keep it. I would choose from these, keeping it simple. So, one of the things I would usually require students to do is to make a container that's as small as possible. And the reason for that is, well, twofold. One, sometimes I like to have size constraints so that I don't have, just a ton of designs like and nowhere to put them in the classroom. It's just a practicality thing. But this actually has a real world connection as well, because if we're imagining that we are manufacturing boxes of candy to sell, we know that those are going to be distributed out to stores, and stores don't have unlimited space. So the more you can package and the more you can ship out, the more that fits on the shelf, the more you're likely to buy, right? So this is sort of the explanation that I put forward with the students as to why we want to keep it as small as possible. Now, if I use that small criterion, then I usually also say that the box has to hold a certain number of candies. So as small as possible holds at least 4 pieces of candy. So you can choose that number. It doesn't really matter what number you choose there. I also ask them to make it stackable. So that means if you were to close this candy container, I try not to say box. By the way, it's hard not to, but I try not to say box just because you might get a variety or some very strange looking containers that you wouldn't be called boxes, right? So I just try to use the term that's as vague as possible so that I don't accidentally feed my students the idea for the design, if that makes sense. But stackable is kind of the same practicality thing. We know we're going to have to put these into boxes and ship them to stores. So we want them to be stackable. And if they stack on top of each other, that means that the candies inside should still be protected and should not be crushed, right? We'll talk about ways to measure in a second. And I also ask that it keeps the candy or confection secure. And I also say eye catching. I don't say pretty, because if I say pretty, that limits what people might create. But also, like sometimes if you say pretty, sometimes some boys will immediately shut down, so they don't want to make a pretty thing necessarily. And they don't have to, right? Because there are always all kinds of different people that we might be selling these candy containers to. So, what would appeal to you? So, you can create a candy container that you would like to receive as a gift. So, if you opened it up and you saw it, what would make you go, oh, that looks amazing, or oh, that looks so cool, or oh, that looks so beautiful? Whatever it is, it doesn't matter what word or what adjective you use there. What would you want to receive? So then you're going to get some really interesting shapes and designs all around. If you say eye catching and explain what you mean by that instead of pretty, you might be surprised what you get. Now, let's say you want to increase the difficulty. So, the way that I would do that is if I were in the classroom, I would give them fewer rigid materials because we have a criterion for it to be stackable and to keep those candies in place and secure and protected. Fewer rigid materials makes that harder to do. With this year, if you're doing hybrid or distance learning, I might not bring that in as a criterion, but I might just sort of mention it as an extra challenge. I'll say something like, if you really want to challenge yourself, limit your rigid materials because that's going to make it trickier. Does it make it impossible? I don't know. Why don't you find out? So you can sort of like float an idea because some kids really get like engaged in uh, really excited about a challenge that they think is impossible. So sometimes that's a fun thing to throw out, even if it's not like officially on your criteria and constraints list. I would require in the box more candies or candies of different sizes and shapes because keeping them all secure is a little bit harder to do if they're a bunch of like odd shapes. And you can do that again. Remember, even if they're making models of candy. So in this case, if they don't have lollipops, that's okay. They know what one looks like, right? So if they have cardboard scraps or junk mail, they can surely make something this size and the shape of a lollipop. So have them do that. And then another thing I'll do with older students is I'll talk about shelf dimensions. So an imaginary like CVS or, your grocery store or whatever, I'll say like you have been allotted a shelf that has, whatever you can choose the arbitrary measurements, but like, let's say this shelf has a space for you that's 12 inches by 6 inches by 6 inches. So you need to fit 10 of your units on a shelf that size. Now, they're not supposed to make 10 units. They're supposed to make one, but then do the calculations to make sure that they would fit. So that can be a good one to do for older students. I would only do that probably some fourth grade classes that if I have been doing STEM challenges since the beginning of the year, but probably more like fifth and up. And I have some measuring success ideas for you and some extensions to make it even tougher on the other side of the build. For measuring dimensions, so one of the things I said at the beginning was I want it to be a small container. So the way we do that is I have them measure the dimensions at the widest point of their container because some of them are going to make, star shapes or heart shapes or round. They're not always going to be like a perfect rectangle or a perfect square kind of shape. So then I just have them measure at the widest points. And then you can have them from there either find the actual volume, if that makes sense in your standards and the kinds of shapes that they made for their containers, or maybe even estimate volume. That can be really tricky depending on what kinds of designs they made. So just kind of play that one by ear. And it's okay if you decide you want to do that and then somebody has like an insane shape that's like really difficult because that's then something you have them bring to the class discussion, right? Bring that during your synchronous time and just say like, I don't even know how to estimate this. Now that's something we can open up a discussion and talk about. Yeah, that is a tricky shape. Like, I wonder what we could do. What are some ideas? Like, how can you find out the volume of a shape that doesn't have, like a standard calculation we're used to, like with rectangular prisms or cubes or whatever, and then see what they come up with, right? You can come up with an estimate. But I think just that discussion of how to problem solve something like that is so valuable. To test whether or not it's stackable, since we're not having the kids make multiple of their candy containers, you're just going to have them make one. I usually just stack books on it. Just have them stack books on top of it to make sure, and I have them go kind of like as far as they feel comfortable. In the classroom, if you have something you can actually like a scale and you can weigh and keep it more standard, that's great. But that works fine, because they're not going to stack them. You can be more specific too. Like you could stack them maybe 3 high, or it needs to be stackable and hold at least, 2 pounds or whatever. Or this one textbook needs to be on top of it. You don't need to complicate things terribly. These are just different ways to measure, the results of what they've built to see if they met the criterion. For the next part, it was like securing the candy or the confection. So what I usually do is I'll take it or have them do it. I don't do it myself. But you take the container and you flip it and you shake it. So it's an invert and shake test. And then you flip it back over and open it up. If everything's still in place, then you're good to go. Or if you did something like with a cupcake, you flip it over, you open it up. As long as the frosting didn't get all smashed on the top, you're good to go, right? Another thing you can do for the stackable test, should have flipped these bullet points, is to, if you actually have a level, if they're in your classroom and you have the tool that is, a level, you can see it would be not necessarily impossible to stack if it's not level, but that's something else you might have them test and talk about whether it's important or not that it would be perfectly level and what problems you might run into if it isn't. And then eye catching, I usually just have them give themselves a number out of 10 or vote on each other's or kind of give each other feedback in the class, like what they would score it out of 10. And then if you want, they could graph that data or they could find the average of it or whatever. But more often than not, I just have them, grade themselves on that as a personal score. For extensions, I always, again, I've been saying this kind of all week. I'll ask them these questions a lot, but wait time in between, not rapid fire. What do you see when we're looking at the different designs? What do you notice? What do you wonder? I might ask them which designs, other than your own, were your favorite and why, and kind of go through what made a successful design, because a lot of it is going to be meeting the criteria and constraints. But on this challenge too, this one's such, has so much room for interpretation. And it's so interesting to see what they think of for eye catching and what would be appealing to them, that there can be a lot of great discussions around color combinations and shapes that people chose, and things that are surprising are all great. So another thing with shipping, so many great math standards can be tied into this. So trying to figure out how many of their candy containers fit into various boxes. I've done this kind of thing with even second graders. So what I've done in the past, it would have to be adjusted now, probably because of shared materials things, but I would bring in different size boxes, like big boxes, and have a different, like, they're basically all at different centers with these different size boxes. So some of them would be like the big Rubbermaid containers, that you store things in your garage. Some of them might be just like bigger Amazon kind of boxes, but not all the same. I try to, have some variety in there. And then I have them try to figure out how many of their containers would fit into those boxes. And what with younger kids, there's a lot of time in the beginning where they're just trying to figure out, like, oh my God, like, I'm gonna bring this back on because this isn't much show guide. There's a lot of time at the beginning where they're just like sitting there with their little container and there's a big box and they put it inside, and then they don't know what to do next, right? They're second graders. How do they figure out how many fit if they didn't make that many? So that's kind of where we start with our problem solving. What's one way you could try to make you could try to figure this out? So some kids will just guess, right? They'll just be like, I think 20. Oh, great. Why do you think 20? Like, what made you think that? And they might be able to talk through it, or they might, that's just what I think. Sometimes that's what second graders and younger kids, well, that's just what I think. Okay, well, that's fair. How could we test it? And some might say, well, we could make 20 of them. Yes, we could. We could make 20 of them and see if they fit. What's another way? And try to, like, figure out and, get all their different ideas. Maybe some are more viable than others. And maybe none of them are really viable, right? Because you don't want them to build 20 of their containers. That's not going to be a thing you want to use your time for. But what I have done in the past with them, and you can kind of share this as an idea, but I always try to get their ideas first, because sometimes they come up with something you didn't think of. And it's always better, even if they come up with what I've thought of, it's always better if it comes from them, right? So I've also done where I've given them like butcher paper, and they kind of cut it to the size of the box and they trace, like however many they can fit on the size of the box. This takes a long time if you have second graders. So this is the kind of thing that I've done. Like, if I'm just like, I've decided like this is happening on Valentine's Day and I'm going to like take the afternoon and this is what we're doing. We're going to exchange cards. We're going to do candy container. We're going to test out all this stuff, because here's the thing. Valentine's afternoon has never been a terribly effective time to get much teaching done. I don't know if you've had that experience, but I surely have. So doing something like this, where you might not usually have the luxury of like deciding an entire afternoon is going to be spent on a STEM challenge, I found it's really the best thing, because they are engaged and they are doing hard work and real problem solving, and they'll do it. So anyway, just a thought, and it's just a possibility. So they'll trace it, and then we try to kind of figure through, like, okay, well, now how tall is this on the side of the box? And then maybe they can measure out and make lines. And I don't think second graders are going to be multiplying, but I do know they can draw a picture. And you will be surprised at how long they will try to work on a problem like this. You will be shocked at how long they will try to do this, and they will draw it all out. And we make a big production about like, oh, this is going to be such a tough problem. Won't it be fun to try to figure it out? It's amazing what you can do with your own attitude toward it. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, but this has been, I first time I did this, I was scared, but it worked. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to keep doing that from now on because it's a kind of problem that's really difficult to solve. But then when they do it, it's amazing. So you can do that with just one box, one group, or if there's more time, or if your kids are older, they can come to this much faster, right? Like a fifth graders can probably figure out that whole idea of like, here's how we might be able to figure it out, and they'll be able to multiply. It'll be faster. So I might then have them move from box to box to box and then figure out which of these big shipping boxes would make the best shipping container for your design. And they're not all going to be the same, right? And typically, like in a normal year, they might not all individually have their own boxes. They would have, maybe have worked on it with a partner. Sometimes I have them do their own though, because it's fun and they like to, and it's not hard to buy these materials because you saw them at the beginning. It's mostly like candy and paper plates is what I usually use. Okay, let's talk about some other ways to do this. So younger students, hands-on centers, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I always have them talk about how they figured it out or how they approached the problem or where they might have gotten stuck as they went through it. I asked them if they're older students, like fifth and up, how much wasted space, to try to estimate how much wasted space there was in the box. And then, of course, figuring out the ideal size, even if one wasn't shown at the centers, they can say like, oh, this is what was here. And among these boxes, this was the best. But if we could create our own boxes or go to a store and have more options, this is the size that would be best, and justify that. So this is kind of another example of how you could do it. If your kids are at home, you could try to do the same thing. It's a little bit tougher. I would not do this with like second graders who are at home. I think it's just too much for a parent to try to deal with on their own. But if you do have kids in your classroom, or you start them out, or you have older kids, then you could give them something like this to try to work through on their own. And if you want, you can then scale it up and go from the shipping boxes to shipping trucks and trying to figure out what's the cheapest way to actually ship your boxes. So the ideal box with the ideal truck, and you can see there are different like rental costs here that I've tied in. Again, this is the kind of thing that I would only use with older students probably. And I would make sure we had lots of time to do it. And I do think Valentine's Day is a good day for it because you're not getting much else done if you're anything like me. And then if you want to tie in an ELA connection, once they have their container, then you can have them like create a print ad or a viral video or a social media post to promote their containers as though they are being sold in stores. That can be fun to see too. As always, you don't need either of these resources necessarily to do this challenge. I've just talked you through all the main points, but there are so many handouts in the print version, and there's like so many options on the Google Slides as well. One of them I just showed you. So those are options. And if you do this challenge with your kids, please, if they have pictures, tag me. Somebody tagged me earlier today on Instagram with kindergartners who had done Frosted Forest, which was the one we did pandemic makeovers for that a few weeks ago. It's like triangle trees is the other thing that I call it. And the pictures on Instagram of the students and their designs. And we actually had a little chat about like how the challenge had gone and the highs and the lows and all of that. And it really made my day. So if you ever do challenges and you're posting pictures anyway on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, please tag me. It really makes my day to see students. Because sometimes guys over here, I'm not sure if anybody sees what I do, or it makes all the difference in the world to like see the application of it and like see kids are like working through these problems in their classrooms. It like delights me. And I'm just going to pull up. I just noticed I had a comment from Ruth. And she says, as teachers, we underestimate students with their creativity and ingenuity to create. However, they are able to perfect and improve what we teach them. I discovered there's no creativity without challenges. Oh, thank you so much, Ruth. Well, that's so nice. What a nice day this was between that comment and seeing the kindergartners with the frosted forest or triangle trees. Just it makes all the difference in the world. So if you do these challenges or any challenges in mind with your kids, I'd love to be tagged. And then just a reminder, We have Elementary STEMCon and Beyond, which is a virtual conference for both elementary and secondary teachers coming in April. Every single Sunday on these social media challenges that are channels, excuse me, that you see posted right here, we're giving away a free seat. There's a contest that starts every week on Sundays, and then we choose the winners on Saturdays. So this week, if you find this post, it's bright pink and it has a quote from Karen. That's the one that has the directions for this week's challenge. And it's super easy to enter. So if you haven't already, listen, you need to. It's an amazing conference. We have the best time. We have the best presenters. And also, they are so generous and they actually donated more than $50 of bonus materials, STEM materials, for like resources, like lessons and things like that, that are downloadable. So you don't want to miss it. All right, that is it. We are done with the Valentine's Day STEM Challenge Pandemic Makeovers. Thank you so much for joining me this week. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Get some rest, do some fun things, and then decide which challenges you are going to bring up next week with your students. Bye for now.